Well, spring ball's right around the corner, and anytime we talk about the LSU Tigers, we always invite in our friend Blake Ruffino of AYS Sports. Blake, I appreciate the time, man. I know we haven't really talked about this, but I know you do live shows, and I know you talk LSU baseball. That game last night, before we get it kicked off, gave you a little bit of a heart attack. I was watching the Twitter feed, and that was a tough one to
It
watch in person too.
very much it was time to overreact about a midweek. Not that any SEC teams had, didn't get beat or run ruled during the midweek. It was time for full panic. Bryce, it's funny. It's like, we forget that baseball does this, right? This is the mindset that I have for baseball in general, just in general, whether it be pro baseball or just college baseball. Just because you're pointing out that when the bases are loaded 5 straight times and you get 0 runs with 0 outs is not an overreaction. It's a reality.
Yeah.
Regardless of when the season is, it's a reality. And I think that this fan base, for what it's worth, is like either you're, oh my God, you're overreacting. No. I mean, at some point that's going to come back and bite you in the ass. Last night, you had bases loaded, 1 out. Steven Milam comes through with a line drive, and you wind up winning the game. Funny how that works out. So I think that, Bryce, there's a couple of things in college baseball, be it realistic. Like, I don't know if anybody saw the Florida game last night. like, brother, they couldn't throw a strike. And then, listening to Jay this morning, it's like, man, he was pretty much relieved that they walked out there with a win. Then they get to come back on Wednesday and see how it goes. But, I mean, look, there's one thing about being realistic and then being and we'll talk about this today because LSU fans are pissed off at me. But, I mean, it just comes to a part where early in the season you're trying to figure out a lot of things. And, look, I'm still very high on this team. I mean, defensively, man, they have been fantastic. And it's the first day that they showed, like, hey, maybe there's a weakness. And Luis Hernandez might have just become your most valuable player. Yeah. Just in the sense of that what you saw last night. So I was overreacting, Bryce, sitting there watching. I was getting mad because you can't have the presidential Congress thing going on one screen and then be mad that you're losing in midweek on the other. I mean, it was a bad night all around, so you got to pick one.
You got to pick one. And I'll tell you the reaction from the fans in the stadium. One of the best things, and look, I mean, LSU draws more for a midweek than some teams draw on a weekend. I want to get that completely straight. The interference call on Michael Braswell. Okay, so for people who are just tuning in for LSU football, just bear with us for a second. But the Michael Braswell gets the interference call. Jay comes out, talks a little bit. The infield convenes at the mound, and you hear this one lone fan, "Come on, Braswell!" And Michael immediately turns his head right and finds him. And it's one of those things like in a smaller ballpark setting, there's not as many fans. LSU kind of experienced that last night with the weather and everything. It was one of those like very, I guess we'll call them intimate moments between fan and player. And the Tiger fans let the players know, hey, Cade, you got to block that. Let's throw some strikes and Braswell, get out of the damn way, was one of the things they said.
Well, I don't know. And I think to Jay's argument on the Braswell thing, the dude's stealing third.
Yeah.
You're going to get on the outside part of the bag to go down and get the tag down. It's not his fault that.
What is he supposed to
do? Correct. What is he supposed to do? Now, Cade Aaron Beatty is a whole different story. I mean, Bryce, like, I mean, I saw some tweets like, oh, Alex Milazzo, and I'm like, brother, y'all better put some respect on Luis Hernandez's name. I mean, you were there in Frisco this weekend.
Yeah.
One pass ball. Pass ball. I mean, like, dude, I mean, he might not be the best at pop time and getting and throwing guys out. Okay, whatever. But gee, my goodness. I mean, he came in the 5th inning last night. He came in. You didn't have a pass ball, brother. Like, I mean, like they didn't score another run, by the way, or they scored 1 run, by the way. So I'm like, there's a big difference here, and that's why defense is such a big deal. Listen, man. I mean, this team, I'm glad they're finding adversity now. And look, I think too. This is what I've said. because of the way that last year ended, I don't think that the guys that were the core nucleus of this team can be flustered by anything right now.
Milam is a great example. If you watched his
right,
presser last night, he's a great example of that. He's, at least we're winning the games now. Like that wasn't the case last year. You were facing adversity and you were losing. At least you're winning. You'd rather learn those lessons in a winning effort rather than a losing effort.
without a doubt. And then, I mean, again, here was the feel that I had. NDSU came in here to pop you in the mouth, and you were lollygagging around, and then you had to turn it on. And so that in and of itself, I think, look, they're going to be fine, man. They'll be fine.
They'll be all right. They'll be all right. And also for people, the last piece on this that are making fun of NDSU 1-10, they played a road series at Dallas Baptist, a road little midweek series at Lamar, at Rio Grande Valley, and then at Alabama before coming to LSU. They've played, and Jay said this, a gauntlet. 1-10, 1-9 is very deceiving on. That's not who they're going to be at the end of the season.
Well, and Schaffner, their leadoff. I mean, think about the lineup or the teams you just talked about. Lamar's probably going to win the Southland. Rio Grande Valley, I didn't know who they were until I saw that they run ruled Dallas Baptist, and then Dallas Baptist just run ruled Oklahoma. You're right, Bryce. I mean, it's not conducive to who they've played. Schaffner went up against that lineup, basically the same schedule that give or take what you faced, right?
Yeah.
He's hitting 420.
Jay said he's a dude.
I mean, there's, like Jay said, there's not. I mean, they got some swings, but the big thing was, well, first off, where in the hell is Chandler Dorsey been? That's a question that I had because he just threw strikes. But then secondly, again, I'm just glad that you went up against a good opponent, but you went up against an opponent, you faced adversity, you overcame adversity. That's what you want to see in a team early in the season.
No doubt about it. LSU baseball in full swing.
Yes.
We're here to talk spring ball, man. Spring football right around the corner. That means Blake, and I'm going to use his word, gets to come out of his hermit shell and come over to campus. So we'll see each other next week. A week from today, Blake, I believe, is our first media availability. March the 12th is when we will get to.
Okay, I thought it was Monday. I'm glad to know.
It might be. Honestly, I'm so in baseball mode right now that I'm trying to shift back over to football. So that being
Saturday, but thank you for not, thank you for, let me keep my Saturday for once. So
there you go. You get to enjoy Saturday.
We'll see you a week from today.
Well, listen, man, let's talk spring ball here. And obviously there's been a lot of different conversations about how different programs are going to approach it, and a lot of interesting talk about, I mean, look, you got the email. There might be a post event. Is Brian Kelly going to have a true spring game? A lot of rumors and a lot of rumbles.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you this, because I was watching your show with your friend Carter the other day, the spirited conversation that you two had, and I think there's some questions. And you and I talked about this on the phone the other day about what has to be identified and corrected, or identified and saying, hey, we have to correct this in terms of the portal posts, whatever you want to label it as, coaching, whatever. Heading into this spring portion, if I said, Blake, you can have only one question answered, leaving the spring ball portion of the schedule, what is it for LSU and why?
Yeah, well, if it's just one for the entire team, it's offensive line, right? Okay. Like it's offensive line in the sense of there's a Snapchat out there of Carius Kern benching 225 39 times. Bryce, I mean, I don't do anything 39 times, right? Like, I mean, that is insane. So what do you look like in the interior offensive line? I mean, I can confirm there was a thought, Bryce, that Braylon Moore might move to guard and then DJ Chester stay at center. That's not going to work. I do think DJ Chester moves over to left guard to start, and he's about to get pushed, or he can move to right tackle. I think, Bryce, for me, considering the fact that you have a non-mobile quarterback and it's not his strength or want to pick up first downs with his legs, you got to be able to run the football in conventional ways. And when you have an A&M game where you rush for 24 yards, or you have multiple games where you rush for under 75 yards, for O-line for me is going to be the biggest thing. Now, I don't – like, I could come out here and say safety. I could come out here and say defensive line, but I don't – I'm kind of speechless of, like, in reference to what you want me to say on him. Is Tamarcus Cooley going to start at star? Well, then when Harold Perkins comes back, then what? I don't know if I get those I don't know if I get those answers, Bryce, until August the 15th, right? Like, I don't think I'm going to get those answers until August. Offensive line's different because they're not going to go add anybody. And the core nucleus of guys that you want to use, I think is there's probably 7 guys that they're going to try to utilize. All right, so who's going to win out those battles? I can start getting an answer there. But, I mean, in reference to questions that I want answered, I mean, that's a whole different topic. And I know, like you mentioned, the thing with Carter was spirited. But listen, man, I don't know if Bryce, you don't have a interior defensive line coach. And you're wanting me to come out here and not you, but like fans are on fans are on my rear end right now because they're saying I'm being too negative. Okay, so let's talk about that for just a second. I've posed this question for everybody who said I'm being too negative. Look at me and tell me in the face that you think 257.88, which I did the math, and I went to public school, so there's about a 95% chance that it's right, 5% chance that it's wrong. But I did the math myself. And all these high-profile SEC games, you're giving up 250 yards on the ground. Like, you don't have an interior defensive line coach. Do you have the personnel that can combat that? So Bryce, I don't even think that I'm going to get that answer, or we're going to get that answer until Clemson, who, by the way, can't run the football, by the way. So there comes the time where, like, there are so many questions that I have. On the offensive side, I feel like it's just more like, all right, who's going to win out? Yeah. Defensive side, my question is, do you have the dudes? So I think that the questions of me being negative, offensively, I think you're going to figure it out. It's just defensively, I'm worried. I think that I'm not being negative. I'm worried because now you're going into your 8th defensive line coach since 2000. Brian Kelly's had 4. He's never had the same more than 1 year. That's why I stick with the offensive line, because at least I know where I'm going to get, because I think it's going to be a revolving door in that interior defensive line for at least throughout the spring and at least through the fall.
You know, I like how you painted the picture of that's being negative, because I get called out a lot, and the team that I talk a lot about, both LSU on our message board and Georgia Tech here on this podcast, about, look, all we're doing is pointing out, hey, here's a reality with data to back it up. We're just simply asking the question. It's not hating. That's really what you do. That's good journalism. Hey, there's some data points here that tell you something. I've got some questions about it, and now I'm a hater and I'm a traitor and I'm not a true fan. That's I
have Georgia, Tennessee, LSU, and Alabama helmets. So apparently I'm a homer of those too. So
yeah, well, not top 8 content creator. So that's what that rolls as. But it is what it is, Blake. No, but you bring some good questions. I wanted to hit on this before we move on to the next question. Okay. Your ideal starting 5 along the offensive line. I've got some in my mind, and you kind of hinted at it. Who do you want to see, or who do you hope rises to the occasion? Who's that starting 5 against Clemson?
Look, I still think Tyree Adams has shown a lot. Like, you know, I know you and I and Zach and others had conversations about, like, hey, man, Tyree Adams looked good last fall, you know, and then he gets hurt, and then he moves into the interior. And so I think that he's been fine there. I think you could find him at left tackle. Look, I got to be honest with you. It's not necessarily because I've never seen the kid play in person. Bryce, the only thing I keep hearing coming out of football right now, or the Ops building, is Carius Kern. Oh, yeah. If what you keep pushing to me about Carius Kern, either he's going to start at left guard or you're going to rotate that position out, because I still feel like you'll have Tyree Adams, don't know at left guard, Braylon Moore, and then you're going to give Josh Thompson the deal at right guard. And then what do you do at left guard and right tackle? I think it's more, to break it down in its specificity, is the 2 position battles I think that you're really trying to figure out here, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, Weston Davis, what's up? I mean, you didn't play him in a bowl game. You didn't bring him in practices during those bowl games. You put Miles Frazier out there. Well, that tells me a lot that I needed to know about what they thought about your maturity level at that position. So, Bryce, really, it's not a whole 5 that I'm necessarily trying to look at, because you got your center where you're going to at least turn to. So what happens with DJ Chester? Does he move to left guard? Does he move to right tackle? I think that's going to be a big thing in day one. And then and then let's say, for example, he does move to right tackle, which I do think would be a better suit for him. Then what do you do at left guard? I don't think, Bryce, personally, that you're going to be able to keep some of these young freshmen out for long, right? I think that some of these guys are going to get beat out. Again, here's a news flash to everybody. When you recruit at a high level, at some point you're going to hit, right? Like at some point, these guys are going to come in here and hit. You literally are getting rid of, not really getting rid of, you're literally moving on from two guys that started as freshmen. So let's not act like that can't be a deal here. I'm really intrigued by left guard, but Bryce, here's my ultimate thing. Guard, center, guard. You got to be better there. I mean, it's a Jaden Daniels would attack you from the outside, so it made it look like that a lot of different things had to happen in the interior. Instead of having a traditional one tech, you would move both defensive tackles to the three tech because he did not like running right up the middle. It was a vast way of how they were doing things to try to guard him. Now people are doing more traditional things on you. So I do think that interior guard play, and by the way, I thought Paul Mabinga got better. I mean, look, Caleb Banks, for what it's worth on Ruffino and Joe show, was my highlight player of coming out of nowhere. Caleb Banks had a floor to the defensive tackle. Get ready. He doesn't have the stats. He doesn't have that. Go back and watch the Ole Miss game, the LSU game, and all these others. I thought that Paul did fine there. Now, did he give up a sack? Okay. All right. Like, I don't know what you want me to say to that. But they still were – he was still moderately good. So, Bryce, even in some depth pieces, I think that you have some experience there, and it's going to be interesting to see more in the interior for me and at right tackle what you do there.
Yeah, I've got Weston Davis listed, and I want to see Carius Kern, but I've got Weston Davis, honestly, Blake, listed as my guy to watch. Like, it does – if he makes a jump, then I feel better about that right tackle spot. Like, that's I feel cool about it.
Right, and Bryce, here's the good thing. Then you'd have Weston Davis – you would have DJ Chester, and I'm trying to think of who else. Maybe Callaway. I mean, maybe battling that. Maybe battling that out.
Williams, if they feel like he's moved, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have a lot of option, but again, it just comes down to listen. Any kid at 18 years old, I gotta stop calling them kids, but any young adult that is benching 225 35 times, I just don't know how much he gets bullied early, right? And I don't know of anybody on this defensive line that can bully him if I'm just being blunt. So there just comes a point where, listen, when you got that, Bryce, I will give up speed in the interior for strength. You got to push dudes, right? Like you got to move some bodies. By the way, he put on Snapchat. Carius Kern is the reason I have Snapchat now because he keeps putting his lifts on there. He squatted 556 times, Bryce. Like he's 18. Like I can't even count to 550, much less squat it. Okay, so that's the part for me that you hear it coming out early that he might be taking at left guard. By the way, I haven't brought up Solomon Thomas, who could you put him at left guard? Is Carius Kern at 6'5" elusive enough to play right tackle? I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to find out here. I will say this. Carius Kern reminds me of a little bit more, but a more athletic Anthony Bradford. I think you were coming in on the beat at the end when Anthony Bradford was here. Now Anthony Bradford's a starter in the league. When you have maulers and road raiders and you're able to just keep getting those 4 or 5 yards and you can push dudes, that's when you start breaking teams. So the offensive line is very intriguing, but especially in that interior. And then how does it look with the other two, I think is a big deal. And by the way, I love Garrett to death. Really, I know people think I hate him. I love him to death. Garrett had to make calls at the end of the season and would change the calls from DJ Chester of what he saw. Braylon Moore, I do think, gives you an advantage in the interior, even in the running game, because of different calls and different formations of what you saw a season ago. So, Bryce, it's very technical, but when Garrett does not have to worry about that, it does take a lot off of his plate, which then could help open up things in the running game too.
Perfect segue, man. Perfect segue. You and Carter were talking about this, the back and forth. It's almost like you've done this before once or twice. Y'all were talking about this, and I cannot remember the specific game that you were alluding to in terms
South
of
Carolina.
Bad game. South Carolina, perfect. So, was it a bad game or a good game? And look, I was there. I was on the sideline when the brutal interception late that let's just be real, should have won the game for South
Yep.
Carolina. We can say that now, 8 months after the fact.
Right.
But Blake, I'm sitting here and I'm looking, and I was watching some of his game film last night and kind of diving into my own piece about what I feel like he can improve on. And I was like, I know I'm going to ask Blake this question. He's far from a finished product, but for me, Blake, I had him as the top returning quarterback in the SEC because you can't ignore 4,000 plus yards. You just can't ignore it.
Yep.
To be the top guy taken next April, which I think he has that potential.
I do too.
Look at the quarterback class. What does he need to show you? Is it decisiveness? Is it decision making? Is it something else?
So just in case not everybody saw it, they'll watch this. Carter said that he thought that he had a great game against South Carolina. And I was like, look, we can fight over semantics, but okay, 3 turnovers in a game to me is not a great game.
No.
Doesn't mean that you can't have great moments. Okay, are we gonna forget about the 3 turnovers? Bryce, think about this. There was 9 turnovers in 4 games. Or 3, 9 turnovers in 3 games, and then 11 turnovers in 4. In the heart of your SEC when you lost 3 straight. All right, so let's break that down. What I need to see Garrett Nussmeier get better at is one thing and one thing only, is decision making. Okay. A lot of people put Joe Sloan in a prism of him, quote unquote, making bad calls. And the Florida game, I had kind of had enough, and I took to Twitter like, hey, man, this is a 3rd and 4. You have Aaron Anderson on a drag route. They went quarters and then pushed quarters. So for that, the linebackers are just pushing out. They're making Garrett throw everything underneath.
Yeah.
You're missing those constantly. You had an in route by Kyron Lacey that's missed, and he is wide open. I think that there are a couple things working for and against Garrett because, look, it's a new offense. It's a new lingo. It's a new situation. You're right. He's a first-time starter. He's got to work through that. The thing for Garrett, whether it be him as a freshman when he came in against Arkansas or whether he came in again and threw for 300 yards and a half against Georgia, what is everything amounted to that we want to see him work on? Decision-making and turnovers. Bryce, you will not. Look, he is, and I mean this, he by far, as a passer, is the most gifted dude in the SEC, maybe not named Arch Manning. Okay, pick whichever one you want. Fine by me. I don't care. As a passer, a pure overall passer, when he's in rhythm, nobody will beat out Garrett Nussmeier. No one. The problem comes in when he starts making bad decisions and has to press. Now, I know what the argument's going to be. Blake, he didn't have a running game. You're right. There's no defending that. The problem is that does not eliminate turnovers. That does not eliminate the fact that you have to stop making turnovers. Bryce, he had 17 turnovers. And so for me to come out here and say that you got to eliminate the turnovers, me and you, so let's take LSU out of the equation for 1 second. You and I had a conversation literally in the fall and talking about Georgia Tech. I'm like, bro, if Haynes King starts turning the ball over, they're going to upset somebody they shouldn't. That's a conversation that you and I had about Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
We just found a letter like we're Blues Clues. They're on the prefaces of knocking off the SEC champion in Georgia. He's not turning the ball over. So, again, it doesn't matter if it's Jesus Christ Almighty, Garrett Nussmeier, or whoever quarterback that you want to put in there. If you do not eliminate some of those, Bryce, if he's not at 8 to 9 turnovers, you are not going to be in the playoffs. You cannot have 17 turnovers and make it. It will not I don't care who you are. You have to be special on one side of the football for that to happen. So, again, is he going to throw for 30 touchdowns? Probably. Is he going to throw for 4,000 yards? More than likely. Is his completion percentage going to be better? More than likely. It's the decision-making of the turnovers. Now, my humble opinion is late in the game, he gets lazy with footwork. Bryce, think about this. Of the 12 interceptions that he threw this year, 10 of them came after halftime in every game. Teams adjusted on him, so the split was 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions in the second half of games. All of those came in, or 9 of those came, in the second half in the SEC. One of them came against South Alabama. Think about this. It was the month of October. that this really exploded. So the heart of your season when you didn't have a bye, teams adjusted it against you, and not even Garrett. This isn't on Garrett. This is where I get on Joe Sloan. You kept running the same stuff, and they adjusted to you. So that for me is where not only Garrett, run game, and everything, the decision making from Sloan, from Garrett, and from the running game has got to take a big leap forward. Do I think Garrett is going to be better? I can't say this more than I've been saying it. I think that he's a Heisman Trophy contender.
Yeah,
I do not know how how else clear I can make it that I think he's a Heisman Trophy contender. But Bryce, somebody's going to have to come at me and tell me where they think that 17 turnovers and not fixing that is like, Bryce, I feel like I'm having a fight about something so stupid. Like, I do. By the way, Haynes King had 17 turnovers. So, I mean, like, is he a first-time starter? Yes. What has been the thing with Garrett that everybody has said? Well, man, if he reigns in the decision-making and turnovers, man, he might be elite. It's not a first-time thing that we've talked about.
Yeah.
So if and when that happens, I mean, man, you're going to make a playoff. I mean, like, I do think it could be that simple.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I like what you said, too, about just him in rhythm. And I just go back to a couple instances, couple special moments. The last drive against Ole Miss and just certain stuff where you see when he's locked in. I mean, you kind of go back, and I'm thinking throw of the year, and I've got a couple candidates. The throw over the middle against Ole Miss. I mean, that is the definition of locked in. That's what, when NFL GMs and scouts turn on the tape, that's going to be one of the first 2 or 3 clips off of his film.
Anticipation.
The anticipation of that throw is what you have to have.
Right.
No, I love it. I love what you said. I'm on base with you too. I think it's really as simple as that. If he cuts it down, he should be in New York, and LSU should be hosting a playoff game. I'll even go that far. They should be hosting a playoff game.
I agree.
He is, in fact, 7 or less turnovers, because we're talking about a monster season for him.
Well, and think about this too now. He might not be able to lead you out of it, but I know for a fact that, like, Jaden Daniels couldn't lead you out of it. Well, Blake, our defense was worse than what we're going to be. I get that. I'm with you. Okay, like, come on. But there also comes a fact too where, like, there are other things that got to go well around him. But at the same time, it's the number one thing that they have to work in the offseason. It's not the running game. It's not what receiver's going to be out there. Can Chris Hilton stay healthy? None of that. Bryce, they simply have to punt the football. Like, as Nick Saban said, every drive ends in a kick. Every good drive ends in a kick.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about great, like, you can have great moments in a game. Doesn't mean you had a great game. Did any of those Brett Favre playoff appearances when he threw 3 picks? I mean, like, what are we talking? Like, come on.
Yeah.
Listen, I had this conversation today with fans. Okay. They're on my rear end. They don't want to listen to me be negative in reference to this. Okay. Sounds good. Would you rather me lie to you?
Yeah, that's fair.
Would you rather? Okay, you know what? We're going to win a national championship, Bryce. We're going 16-0, 15-0. We're not going to lose a game. We're going to run for 5,000 yards.
Yeah, we're going to have a trio of running backs, each run for over,
Arlen Berry's going to break the NCAA record in rushing yards this year.
And no, it's real. I mean, look, that's what I think. That's what drives me crazy about certain sections. And look, I'm not calling out every single fan ever. I mean, like, there's certain sects of every fan base that they constantly just want to be told the positives, and there are positives to be talked about, and we're going to highlight those.
Yes.
But you also have to ask the questions when there is statistical data that backs up, that maybe supports a question that's legitimate. It's not hating.
Right.
I'll tell you this though, and I'm not trying to hate on this final topic we got here for you, man, but I am worried about this. I was having the conversation with you last week, and then I talked with some buddies this past weekend about it, and they asked me, they said, Bryce, does LSU, well, they mentioned this first off, and this is not a shot at them, it's to my co-hosts, they don't pay attention as closely as LSU as I do. They said, I think LSU will be better because they've got some, I think they got some elite playmakers. And I sent the GIF back in the text thread there, Blake, and I think it was I think it's John Travolta going like this, and it's like me looking for the elite LSU defenders. And I'm not trying to hate, but I think it's important to point out the reality. Are there guys that have elite moments? Yes. Whit Weeks is one of the more fan favorite, fun guys to watch. It was awesome seeing him do what he did in Fayetteville, like all these cool things. He has cool moments. Does Harold Perkins have those moments? He did 2 years ago. We haven't really seen that since. I will give him credit. The South Carolina game was a good game for him, maybe what we could have seen. My question to you is, does LSU have the ability to have an elite defense? And look, we can argue the semantics of what ranking you have to be in yardage and yards per play, of what quantifies that. But when you kind of go look, maybe there's an outlier too, but when you look at the playoff teams, they all start to kind of range in a group of numbers of where you can't be past, let's just say, a top 40 defense, a top 30. If you're anything above that, you're not going to find yourself the playoff. Does LSU have the guys to get there? And I said, I don't think they have an elite defensive player that I'm going to walk out next week and see who can grow into that. Kind of a two-parter for you.
Yeah. So I'm going to not give you the player that I think can be elite. I do think that there's a position group that can be elite. I do think the edge can be elite.
Okay.
Jamari Butler is going to be a name that we're going to talk about at the end of camp here. But like, bro,
nobody's really talking about, by the way. It's a lot of Pyburn. It's a lot of Peyton. No, I'm right.
So even him and rushing the passer in the interior. So let's go back to what Blake Baker did 2 years ago at Mizzou. They stood up two defensive ends. I do think that you'll see Patrick Peyton and Jack Pyburn standing up on the edges. I do think that you'll see instances this spring of Butler being the interior. But I don't know if Patrick Peyton, like, I want to put him in the Princely Human Yelling class of, hey, man, they were 2-10 and you're mad at him about effort. And by the way, you're worried about him when you sucked. You got more inches of snow at the beach in Florida than wins at Florida State this past year. So I think that he does have the potential to be elite with Kevin Peoples. I don't want to say that he is elite right now. I think he has the potential. Again, now, listen, I'll just throw this out there. I talked to a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. You know who he was more worried about in the game against Florida State in week 1 more than anything? It wasn't Jared Verse. Because I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just going to leave that there. But I do think at edge, because that you're sitting in that star position at 51% of the time per PFF. If you put Perk there, you got Pyburn, you have Peyton, you have Butler, you have Perkins. The interesting thing about this for me is, what do you do for protection? You don't want to use slide protection, because if you go to Patrick Peyton, then if I send Harold Perkins, that means a running back or a tight end's got to be on that edge. I don't give two Rudy Poos what anybody tells me. Harold Perkins gonna mess that dude up. It is going to happen. So I'm really, really intrigued by what they can do at edge. I think Jack Pyburn, for what it's worth, I don't know if he ever registers another sack in the SEC, but my goodness to gracious, his run defense is really good, and you need that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody, to your point, can be elite. Can Mansour Delane be that dude? I don't know. A lot of people said that they thought he would be a 3rd-round pick. I don't know that, Bryce. Like I don't know if he can do that. Yeah. I don't know if they have an elite defender. You're right. I don't know. What I do think, though, is that they could be the sum of the parts in reference to, man, they might not have a top 5 pick, top 10, 15 pick, but my gracious, they are getting after you up front. And I do think that the edge presence can bring you there. However, I'm with you. I don't know if there's an elite player anywhere. Could DJ Pickett turn into that? Maybe, but I'm not putting all my chips in a freshman not having freshman moments. I've seen Derek Stingley go up against Devonta Smith, and as great as Derek Stingley is and was, he still had those freshman moments. That wasn't elite, right? That wasn't an elite 4 weeks for D Stingley. So I do think that they got some playmakers specifically at edge, But I don't. I'm with you. I don't know if I can look. This is what LSU used to do in the past. They'd have an Eric Reed. They'd have a Jamal Adams. They'd have a Tyrann Mathieu. They'd have a Glenn Dorsey. They'd have a Devin White. They'd have a Damone Clark. When you got off the bus, you're like, all right, this guy's borderline the best player at his position. I don't think that you can do that anymore right now. And unless Patrick Payton or Delane or Pickett turn into that, I don't know if you have that.
I want to dig deeper here for the last one. Is there a concern about the linebacker spot? I feel like it's not something we're talking about because we just assume that, hey, you're going to have the Weeks brothers. Devon Keys was, feel like he played pretty well. But I'm also kind of wondering, like, are we just okay because there's just returning faces, so it's just incumbent names on the roster? Or is there something really there that you're like, yeah, I mean, the Weeks brothers are cool stories, but we need them to not be just folk heroes. We need them to be all SEC type of players.
Yeah, and listen, this is another thing that they get mad at me about. So I'm glad you bring it up. Let's dive into it. A&M, Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Florida. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you can look at those games and say that you had really good linebacker play. Bryce, I was told that this defense in the interior, linebacker and defensive tackle got better when Perkins was out. Stop. I mean, look, I think that Whit Weeks had a great game against Arkansas. Player of the game. I don't think that he was great. He had a great season. I don't think he had a good season. I think he had an average season. Here's the thing in the past that I give the linebacking room, and I probably shouldn't do this. The dudes in front of them that are supposed to protect them for guards or centers getting to the second level have been getting absolutely abused.
Yeah.
Bryce, about 85% of the time, teams are going to run zone blocking schemes. When your defensive linemen get pushed around the way that they did in the interior, I don't know what to make of Whit Weeks, right? Like, I see the athletic ability. I'm like, oh, well, when our defensive line –
yeah.
Right. Well, when your D-line does not get pushed around like that, he can flow and he can get there. All right, well, of course.
Yeah.
I do think that there's – the linebacking room has been a hindrance because of how bad of play it has been in the interior of the defensive line. And I know that that's a cop-out, but, I mean, again, A&M, they missed holes, they missed gaps, they missed assignments. Ole Miss was the same. If Lane Kiffin had a brain and instead of worried about Daddygate, he would have been out there and he would have kept running Jackson Dart. By the way, he had 60 yards on 2 drives in the fourth quarter. Just to remind people. I mean, hello. I mean, so then I think of Jalen Milroe in Alabama. I mean, like, again, it's a constant problem of that. I don't know what I can decide on what the massive issue is, because I see that your interior D-line gets pushed around, but then I see that a guard is able to freely get up to a backside linebacker. And I'm like, what is he supposed – I don't know enough about this from a position linebacking standpoint other than me playing center and offensive line in my career. If I'm getting a free release to that, then it's going to be an easy peasy lemon squeezy all day long. So I don't want to say that they can't be really good. The worry I have for them is that I don't know, unless Adir Mitchell, which God bless him, but I mean – unless he just starts literally plugging holes and that they can't get there, then Bryce, I think you'll still have an issue. I mean, we came into the spring, remember, thinking that Caleb Jackson, because he's busting off long runs, was going to continue to be a running back. And all of a sudden we're looking at this and I'm like, bro, no, the interior of our offensive line is dominating. They didn't dominate anybody else. So I think I'm going to cop out on you here about the linebacking core, because I don't know. It's like the chicken and the egg. Which one came first? Now, if you read the Bible, it's the chicken because he made animals. He didn't say, I made the egg and then the chicken. Anyway, but that's the part for me that I'm like, hey, man, until you get consistent defensive tackle play, I don't think that linebacking room is going to be – they're going to have to be heroic if it comes down to it. They're going to have to create traffic that I just don't know if physically they're ready to do.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you there. I think that the biggest thing, like you said, is you also become mentally accustomed to stuff like that as a linebacker.
Yes.
You know, when you know that, let's just play a numbers game, that 80-90% of the time I'm going to have to be fighting off a guard moving up to the second level. You're anticipating that. What does that do? It slows you down your ability to flow when maybe they do get that stuff. And so I think that's something. It's almost like a mental reset a little bit, Blake. Like, can these guys mentally reset as linebackers? Because I think you have the athleticism there. Like, I don't think it's an athleticism ability.
I agree.
I don't think it's a personnel necessarily issue. Like, I like Devon Keys. I like what he brings to the table. But I think that just in terms of the mental reset, like you mentioned, of understanding, you know, can you just find a guy? And it doesn't have to be a Glenn Dorsey. It does not have to be some type of massive game wrecker. It's just got to be somebody that can just plug a hole and let your athletes make plays. LSU has not had that. Blake, how long? 4 years? I mean, truthfully, 4 or 5. I mean, you're going back into the Orgeron days. Truthfully, when's the last time you had a guy that could help you there?
The last time that I remember the most consistent defensive line play that you had was when they went to the SEC championship in 22 with Mekhi Wingo, Jaquelin Roy, and then Mason Smith got hurt. I think that would be, but it still was average, right? Like, I mean, it still was okay, but you had look, I mean, I hate to say it like this, but you had a guy in Micah Baskerville who played above his skis. Like, I mean, he vastly played above his skis, and he had probably 1,200 snaps, 1,400 snaps, whatever it was, going into the season. So, I mean, maybe then, but since, like, the last time I saw LSU be dominant and have a dominant performance up front defensively was the 2021 year against Alabama, where they allowed a national contending, a team that got to the national title, they held them to 6 rushing yards. That is the LSU that I remember. Like, hey, man, we might not be able to score. We might have troubles here and here. But, Bryce, it's not even like what you're asking for and what we're really trying to get to here. We're not asking them to hold teams to 6 rushing yards, to 50, to 100 rushing yards. We're asking you not to hold them to 200 or let them have 257.88 rushing yards per game. I think it's that even if you cut that in half, right? Like, even if you cut that in half, then you're going to win these ball games. Mm-hmm. And I think that in and of itself is, you're right. They haven't had it in a while. And listen, let's call it what it is. The problem has been that you have had too much rotation and too much fluctuation in the coaching staff in your defensive tackle room. You haven't recruited well enough. You haven't developed well enough. You haven't sustained well enough. Well, Blake, you got Don McKinley. Okay, well, Don McKinley's about to have 3 coaches, high school to college. He's about to go on his second defensive line coach. And by the way, just throwing this out there, I heard that Kevin Peoples had a team meeting with the interior defensive tackles. What if you don't hire somebody until halfway through spring? So then, I mean, like, he's being coached by Kevin Peoples at some point. So, Bryce, you gotta solidify that defensive tackle room. I'm not worried about backer, but here's what I will say. To your point, you're right about the athleticism. The thing, though, is that you didn't go in the portal and get anybody either.
Nope.
So you basically are saying, oh, no, we're good here, bro. We're good. Okay. Well, you better be. And so that, you're right. Like, you're going to find out quick. Now, again, I think most of this is come down to the defensive line room. I hate to give the linebackers a pass, but, I mean, it just comes down to, like, bro, Gio Paez, there's a play against A&M where he got blown off the ball 10 yards. I mean, he's in the end zone, and Marcel Reed doesn't get touched.
What's a linebacker supposed to do there? Like, yeah, I'll sum it up for you. It's an incomplete grade. TBD. Really, truthfully.
Right.
Until you see adequate interior play.
Right, and when it didn't happen, Arkansas happened. I don't care what anybody tells me. The Arkansas game was the most complete game that LSU has played from front to start, even with Jaden Daniels. Because you didn't allow teams to run the football. You scored whenever you wanted to. You created turnovers. That is what complete, comprehensive football looks like. It was the best game that you had a year ago. Until you get back to that, I mean, Bryce, I just, it's going to continue to be the same issue in the interior defensive line. And listen, I don't care. Brian Kelly's legacy hinders on what they do at the coaching position along defensive tackle. And I mean that, because you cannot continue to have a rotating door there or things are going to get bad.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. It's going to be an interesting 2025. Like we said, spring ball right around the corner. You can obviously tune in everything AYS has going on. So, Blake, before we get you out of here, man, how can people tune in? And obviously, for content purposes, it's about to kick things up a notch here with spring ball right around the corner. Baseball nearing SEC play as well.
Yeah, AYS Sports. Just wherever you podcast, social media, wherever you're on it, we are there. Just AYS Sports. Hit the follow, subscribe button. Ruffino and Joe show live tonight at 5, but every Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday